I got asked to come and talk about this based on my dissertation work, and I completed that, wrapped that up last August. So I'm fairly new to the PhD world, even though I'm fairly old. So, but part of that work was doing a document analysis on syllabi. The syllabus is really just one small point of communication in your classrooms, and what we talk about really applies to all of the communication that happens in your class. I picked out the syllabus because it's really a record of, in many ways, of instructors' thought processes. And then I also want to be clear, my study focused primarily on students of color. But what we'll talk about also applies to really anybody who has stereotypes about them. So even middle-aged, overweight, bald white guys like me know that there are stereotypes about us, and this applies to us in all of these settings as well. So there's a little teaser for you about what we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to very quickly describe the link between mindset and communication through the syllabus, identify the language and cues that increase trust and engagement in the classroom, and provide some resources to explore, because what I found really was that this is all much more, it's both more complicated than I ever expected and simpler than I anticipated, which I suppose is most of life, right? All right, so implicit theories or mindset. So these really are just fundamental, unexamined understandings that drive our decisions. So when I get a stimulus, how I respond is really dependent upon my mindset and my implicit theory. It comes out of Carol Dweck's work over the last 30 years as a psychologist at Stanford. And you'll hear people talk about growth mindset or fixed mindset. And for those that don't know, if you believe, and this is really a theory, implicit theory about intelligence is the way that she approaches it. So some people believe that intelligence is fixed. It's like eye color, that you get what you get and you can't really change it and you deal with it, right? And other people believe that intelligence is much more like a muscle, that sure, you inherit a certain stature, physique, all of those things, body chemistry, but that you can improve your muscles with challenge, with support, all of those things, right? With really working it every day. And so the science really shows us that growth mindset is really the truth, that you can improve your intelligence, strengthen your intelligence through challenge. And so a student who says, or who has a fixed mindset, is going to look at a test score that they get back and a failing grade in their first math test and say, that's right, I can't. Somebody with a growth mindset is going to say, I can't yet. I wonder what I need to do. So in one case, it's kind of a dead end stop. And in the other case, it's, I need to make a turn and see what else I can do here. So there is tons of research about the impact of a student's mindset on their outcomes and how to tweak a student's mindset to improve outcomes. But there was very, very little about instructor mindset and that impact on things. So that's what really kind of drew me in. There was a study that I found from the University of Indiana. They assessed the mindset of 150 STEM instructors. So was the instructor, did they have more of a growth mindset about intelligence or a fixed mindset? And then all they did was they watched the grade results over the next 7 semesters. So 15,000 data points that they could look at. And what they found, you see there at the bottom, is that if an instructor had a fixed mindset about intelligence going into the classroom, the racial achievement gap was double that of instructors that had a growth mindset, right? It didn't say why, it didn't delve into that at all, But it just showed that gap existed. And the institutional average, by the way, was right in the middle. And so that was really interesting to me. They did account for race, sex, discipline of the instructor. None of those things mattered. It was really the instructor mindset. So they did some follow-up studies. And so you can see here that students who perceived that a fixed mindset was endorsed by the instructor both anticipated and experienced those four things, right? So the downstream effects of an instructor with a fixed mindset are really that it predicts greater dropout intentions, lower class attendance, less class engagement, less end of semester interest in the subject, and lower grades, right? So these studies, again, show that the instructor mindset has a direct impact on performance, but how and why isn't there. So what I did is I did the same assessment of instructor mindset and then asked instructors from the 3 4-year universities here in town to submit a syllabus. And then my instructor, my advisor, Nate Wood, gave me samples. He did a process to make sure that I was getting some good randomized samples covering different areas, subject areas, all of that. And so I was analyzing these samples, not knowing how the instructor's mindset had been assessed, whether they were fixed or growth. So I did this document analysis and came up with these two patterns that I saw in syllabi. And you didn't see a mix of these things. These were happening, like if you saw one, you would see the others. And so here's a quote from that last study that I was showing you. It says, according to the cues hypothesis, people look to situational cues in their local environment to determine what is valued there. These situational cues can be communicated verbally in group or one-on-one interactions and non-verbally by the materials, policies, and practices created by powerful people in a setting, right? So who's the most powerful person in the classroom setting? It's you, right? There are other levels in a power structure in the classroom, but you're really the person creating those materials, policies, and practices. And so we collected over 200 syllabi. I predicted mindset based on what I was reading, and then conducted some clarifying interviews, both with predictions that matched the instructor's assessed mindset and those that didn't, right? To make sure that I was understanding what was happening. So to give you a little definition here, the operations theme is really the difference between using penalties or incentives to drive action in the classroom, right? Motivation is about, it's related more fundamentally to those operations and our students needing to be extrinsically motivated, or are they intrinsically motivated? Do you have to crack the whip or light a fire under them, or do you just have to spark the flame, fan the flame a little bit to get it going? So internal or external. The power, I found that there were certain syllabi that only use the words I and you. There's this clear distinction and separation between the instructor and the learners. And the other set also used the words we and our in more of a communal kind of sense of things. So it's almost what I saw was some instructors framing themselves as judge and jury. You're going to go through my course and I'm going to decide at the end if you've learned everything or not. Or guide. There's an instructor on campus who refers to himself as lead learner. And I really appreciate that and enjoy that. And then the descriptive context. So those with the fixed mindset only provided the what and how. Here's what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, how you need to turn in those assignments, what will be accepted, what won't. But the ones with growth mindset also talked about why. They gave more context to why we were doing things in this way, why we were studying these particular sections. And those, interestingly enough, are the only ones typically that use the word learn outside of the heading learning objectives that's required in the syllabus. So there were syllabi that didn't even use the word learn in them. So I'm curious, and I won't have you answer because I know we got limited time here, but thinking about what examples from your own syllabus, your own teaching and work, do these things really make you think of, right? So we still haven't answered the question about why this would have a disparate impact on students from different racial backgrounds, right? And what it came down to really, in my understanding, is that how students are anticipating cues based on their background and their own lens and understanding is different, right? They're looking at the same language and interpreting things and reacting differently. And it's small cues typically. So stereotype threat is something that really fit the bill for what I was seeing. So stereotype, if you're not familiar with it, I assume what someone else probably believes about me based on the stereotypes about my identity. So, right, I talked about being white, male, middle-aged. I was a college administrator. Oh yeah, I also drive a truck, right? Most students are going to make a guess about my political identity. They're going to make a guess about some other things. And many of those things they're wrong about, right? But I know that that is probably the way they're seeing me, right? I start working not to confirm the stereotypes about people like me. My cognitive resources get split in doing that and lower my performance on whatever task is at hand. And then I end up confirming the stereotypes. And so it's this cycle that goes through. And so we had a student, this was one of the first aha moments for me, a student who said in a focus group we did, we come here knowing that we need to have one foot out the door because we might not be welcome, right? So he's a student of color who is talking about his entrance to the university and having to be aware that he may experience racism here. And letting us know that that's a common thought for a lot of our students coming in. You know, very different than the things I was worried about coming to school. Students of color also know the general stereotypes about students like them, right? So Black students, whatever, you can fill in the blank. Hispanic students, whatever, you can fill in the blank. Female students in engineering, fill in the blank. You know, those are the ones we kind of go to. Like, they're aware that people may be thinking those things, even if they don't believe them, right? So the students also, students of color in particular, also know the general stereotypes about PWIs, primarily white institutions like ours, right? And so there's a stereotype out there that PWIs were built by white people for white people, right? So institutional racism is kind of baked in, even if it's unintentional. They're expecting to experience racism in large and small ways, and they're attuned to those cues and for those signs, for those basic safety reasons, right? And our white students don't have to think about that, right? So their cognitive resources are getting split a little bit. So general stereotypes about a typical college class, and I think the red flags start popping up when they see these characteristics. So lectures, that's all a class is. Grade based on only a few tests. That would be a typical college class, a stereotypical college class in students' minds coming in. Large class sizes. Looking to separate the smart from the dumb, the capable from the incapable, right? Weed out courses, that type of thing. Those are the types of stereotypes that they're if they see those things in a course syllabus or in their first interaction with the course, those little red flags might start going up about, I don't know if this class is one I'm going to be able to do well in. I'm not sure that this instructor will let me pass this class. I'm not sure. It brings into question all of these other things that the instructor might be thinking. Or if you buy into setting up your class in the stereotypical fashion, even though it may be effective, it may mean that you're being interpreted as buying into the stereotypical systems at a PWI, if that makes some sense. And the fixed mindset cues align with that stereotypical classroom, right? And if the cues from an instructor seem to endorse that fixed mindset, it aligns with the stereotypes held and heightens stereotype threat for students. So more of their cognitive resources start to go away. If we can reduce that stereotype threat by providing an atypical experience, then more of their cognitive resources can be focused in on the class. And so it's really, it gives a great explanation for why, like we've known that active learning at NDSU, when we've pursued that, closes the racial achievement gap, right? But it's an atypical kind of experience. Doesn't follow the typical pattern. So really looking at what do students think of as typical and how can you surprise them or kind of quell that a little bit. So this is a piece that I kind of modified. This is the collegial classroom experience model. And Nate Wood started this in his class here, one of his doctoral classes with his students, and they came up with the first draft. And then he's worked on it with Erica Beasler-Thompson and another student that I was in a cohort with. And basically, what it does is kind of shows how this can work. And I wish people would spend more time with this model. And Nate is right here on campus. And so I encourage you, if you like this and want to talk more about it in depth, he would love to talk about it, I'm sure. But if you look right at the center, those instructor inputs, and this really could be classmate inputs as well, right? Or GA or TA, but it's really the inputs to the class. Students interpret that communication and those cues, and they move to one side or the other, right? You're working really to try to create a classroom that embodies that wholeness model of collegiality, interdependence, dialogue, respect, trust. But if they are seeing those red flags come up, they're more likely to move over to fragmentation, self-isolation, self-doubt, fear. You get marginalization. This is where you get really tense arguments in class. You get people withdrawing from the course, like if not on paper, mentally withdrawing from the course. And so this is really about how can we make our intentions and expectations explicit and show students why. All right, and then you can see too, that this isn't just about your course, that they're also getting cues and messages from the department that you're in. They're getting cues and messages from our institution, from our community, right? And all of those tell them whether or not this specific kind of ecosystem is right for them. So in my literature review, I found this piece too about the 3 basic needs of learners are to understand the purpose and relevance of what you're covering and the material you're going to cover, assurance of the ability that they can become competent in the material that you're going to cover, and assurance of the ability to belong, right? And so if we can address these 3 things, you're really going to be moving them closer to the whole side of that model that we just looked at. So some related resources that'll help you, especially when it comes to syllabi. These were 2 articles that really helped me make some good connections. So they talk about content-focused versus learning-focused syllabi. And content-focused is really aligned with what I would call a fixed mindset syllabus, and the learning-focused with growth. It's really, instead of just the what and how, it's also the why. And they have quotes from students who looked at a content-focused syllabi and said, oh, this instructor seems like a real hard ass, right? They're getting that stereotype in their mind of this is a game that I don't know if I can win. And then wise interventions is a really interesting piece that seems pretty simple once you get to it, but it takes the question of race, stereotypes, and other stereotypes out of the mix when a student comes, when you need to give a student feedback. And, you know, for me, when I'm giving a student feedback, they're looking at me through that lens, like, why am I giving them this feedback, right? What is it about them that makes me criticize them, right? And I need to take that out as an instructor and say, we have high standards in this course, and I believe you can meet them, and that's why I'm giving you this feedback. It's as simple as that. And it takes that out, like, because I know you can do this work, you're not there yet, but you can get there, and I just want to give you this feedback to help you hit that mark. Right, so some very simple things, and these articles are just good reads that'll help kind of point you in that direction. All right, so a couple more things, and I'll just open it up for discussion. So I would say use your syllabus to assess yourself. Kind of use it like this is a document that shows how you decided to run your class, right? How you decided to organize, set it up, grade things, and take a look for those power dynamics. Take a look for those pronouns that you're using. Take a look at whether you're providing points for doing a good behavior or taking away points for not doing it, right? Those types of things, like the difference between I'm gonna mark you down 10 points for not going to the Center for Writers versus if you go to the Center for Writers, you'll gain an extra 10 points on this. Those types of carrot and stick type of things. Framing yourself as a guide to the experience in this course, as a guide to the learning, really helps. And then taking a look and asking, you know, as you're looking at your syllabus, are you meeting the 3 needs of learners in that document? Right, on that first day when you're covering that document or when they pull it up and read it, what are they getting out of that? Are they being assured that they're going to learn this material or be able to learn, right? All right, and then set high standards and make the why specific. So I'll open it up from there because that's a lot. And I do have my other references on here, and Stacy, I sent this to you earlier, and so please feel free to share it. So thoughts, questions, challenges, reactions?
So I was wondering if there's any research on like evidence-based ways to help communicate these with the students. So what I mean is, like, let's say you go up to the front of the classroom on the first day of class and say, here are my learning goals, overarching learning goals for the whole course, and here's their purpose. Is just saying that enough for them to have buy-in, or is there any research behind like the best way to communicate that purpose so that they really truly believe it? And kind of like the same type of question of like evidence-based ways to communicate that for the second and third bullets also.
Yeah. So I'm going to, I would send you out to the Student Experience Research Network, and they have tons and tons of research listed there. And this Quay, this is actually from a summary of a lot of that research. And so to get you the specific information, I would point you in that direction. I think, there is, and I can't quote any of it right now, but like you putting up the slide that says you belong here, right? That's like a flashing neon clue, right? You're making it explicit. And so the more that you can help students understand, like, and I think about general education courses like those you teach, like students don't understand why they have to take them. And if the instructor isn't clear on that, then they're thinking, why am I here? So if you can not only connect to, here's what we're going to study in biology this semester and why, but here's why it's a general education requirement. Let's talk about what that means for a minute. If you can just take a step back and help them understand, make some of those connections about purpose and relevance and how this general education will help them in the rest of their studies and moving forward in life, hopefully, that does make a difference. I was at a conference for people interested in becoming vice presidents of student affairs. And obviously I decided no. But one of the things that really stuck with me was they said, if you don't tell people all the details, they're going to make them up. And they'll make them up through their lens, right? Through their own experience and those stereotypes that they're expecting. And so being as explicit as you can, right from the beginning, really helps set the stage.
Thank you. And it's helpful to be validated that just saying that is better than not saying it at all. Because my thought was kind of like, is me just saying you belong here that helpful in terms of them believing that they do, but it's better than not saying it at all, is kind of what I'm hearing from you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some students that'll say, well, we'll see about that. We'll see if you really mean that or not. But then as you set the expectations for the class and show them how they can meet them, that really helps. And then things like, using learning assistants, where they're getting to interact in smaller groups and have their voices heard as they're working through issues and problems. That's a piece of belonging as well and being valued.
I just had a question about, kind of to go off the idea about the sense of belonging. Do you think, how do you say are maybe some good techniques for maybe to incorporate that into like a asynchronous online course environment?
Oh boy. That's a really good question, and one that in my new role I need to answer. Oh gosh. So, I'm assuming that you're talking about a course where there would still be some expectation of interaction through discussion boards or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, there's still definitely going to be, like, and I think an attempt at community building in some way.
Yeah. Yep. So I think what comes to mind for me would be some simple ground rules for how prepared they are coming into those discussions and how they respond to each other. In certainly critical but supportive ways, right? Ways that, so that we know that the intention of all the learners here, you're not competing with each other, you're helping each other learn and grow, right? You're questioning each other and posing those challenges versus needing to compete for a top grade or top 10% gets an A, or those types of things. Setting it up as collaborative versus competitive, I think is good. Even being able to state, so in my case, well, if the admission office says that you can do this work, we're confident you can do this work. I say that having been married to the director of admission for a while before she left. And knowing that they took it very seriously. They would not admit somebody that they didn't believe could handle the workload here. And then there's also an interest in your class in some way, acknowledging that they're coming to this class for a purpose, right? And that if they have the interest enough to study this subject, then they're going to do well in this class, or they're going to belong. This material you'll find this material to be interesting and relevant. Because my guess is most asynchronous courses are going to be electives, well, I guess I'm not really sure. For us, they're going to be, a lot of them are going to be on demand. And so we may not even have the discussion board type of thing, but yeah, kind of tying in, I guess, to their own purpose for being there. Those are my thoughts, but that's kind of off the top of my head.
I can share an experience I had. I can't remember years, they just fly by, but I went to a conference and I learned this technique from somebody who shared it in a presentation. And basically they told us to have the students basically make up the syllabus. There's some probably pedagogical words, Stacey might know what that is. I don't know what that is, but I used it, and I realized, like in Kimberly, in your class, maybe that's not possible because it's a gen ed course, but I did it in a 400 level topics class. And it was probably one of the most fun professor experiences I've ever had, because I was so scared to do it, but they took that, like, the reason I'm thinking of it is because Casey, when you kept saying to belong and that purpose and relevance, like they ended up being harsher on their own, like students grading. I didn't even say they had to do that, but they included it, and they were harsher than I would have been. And I was like, oh, I like this, so I could tell they were kind of into it, and they really, they got to decide what they were going to do. I mean, yeah, I gave them kind of a small structure of this is what we have to do, and here's the other options, and then they decided from there what they're going to do. So that was a really good learning experience for me. It was scary, but you just reminded me a lot when you talked about syllabus.
And that definitely sends a message of, we're in this together, and I want you to benefit from this course. So I want to know, what your expectations are too. And students will always hold each other more accountable than we do. That's true on behavior too. So I was in one of Nate's classes, and I'm a real connectedness person. Connections are kind of where I live. And so I had great experiences going all the way back to my times in college as an RA, or my time in high school as a band member or in the choir, those types of things, where it was really community bonded around a topic or something along those lines. And to be in a doctoral class where they had us read Daring Greatly as a piece of qualitative research, but also to get us to dare in the class and take risks and show vulnerability. And to have my classmates in the middle of the class say, I have never been a part of a group like this. This is a new experience for me, and I'm really happy that I have this. And to know that those were people my age saying that this was the first time they had experienced that kind of learning was really moving. And that's really what we're shooting for here with this and being inclusive, is to develop that environment for students where they can learn from each other without fear of being shamed or without fear of being unjustly judged.
Lisa's wondering if you have any example syllabi.
I don't think I can give any out because they're part of my data set. And I told folks I wouldn't, but you'd be surprised if you just Google. There are a number of syllabi, even from NDSU faculty, that are out there.
I'll see what I can round up. And sometimes a bad example can be just as powerful as a good example. So try to de-identify anything that I find and hold up as being negative, but maybe my own. As I was listening to you, Casey, I was thinking about changes I need to make in my own syllabus. So. Thank you so much for joining us today. I took a ton of notes, and I know that I was thinking about my own syllabus and changes I'm going to make, and thinking about some of the things I say to my students.
Thank you all for taking the time to do this work. It means a lot and makes a big, from an outsider's perspective, talking to a lot of students over the last 20 years, it makes a huge difference. So thank you.